was just thinking about thinking. In this series called Thoughtful Thursday, it's an opportunity for us to explore and investigate how thoughts, emotions, body sensations affect our actions. Today, we're going to start with curiosity and the question of why.
The stress resulting from uncertainty is tremendous in our society. It increases brain cell death, it decreases plasticity, it makes you a more extreme version of yourself. We do almost everything to avoid uncertainty. And yet the irony is that that's the only place we can go if we're ever going to see differently. Creativity, seeing differently, always begins in the same way. It begins with a question. It begins with not knowing. It begins with a why. It begins with a what if. And I should also say that these assumptions are essential for your survival. Every time you take a step, your brain has hundreds of assumptions. That the floor is not going to give way, that your legs aren't going to give way, that that's not a hole, it's a surface. Right? So these assumptions keep us alive. But they can also get in the way because what was once useful may no longer be useful. So a deep question is, how is it possible to ever see differently if everything you see is a reflex grounded in your history of assumptions? Our assumptions and the process of vision is both our constraint and our savior at the same time, right? Because our brain evolved to take what is meaningless and make it meaningful. If you're not sure that was a predator, it was too late, right? So your brain evolved to take this meaningless data and make meaning from it, and that's the process of creating perception. And then we hold on to those assumptions. They create attractor states in your brain, right? And they become very stable. So how could we see differently? It's by engaging the process of creating perception. Well, the first step in that is to not just admit, but embody the fact that everything you do right now is grounded in your assumptions. Not sometimes, but all the time.
So, assumptions. What happens when we notice our assumptions, if we can name them for ourselves and investigate how we even know that they're true? So oftentimes we'll carry what's called as biases with us. If we can challenge our own biases, using our own internal investigative process of our thinking patterns of, how do I know this is true? What other possibilities are there? The what ifs. And then moving into the what thens. We've been teasing this out for a couple of weeks now of what happens when we start really challenging our own thoughts and investigating how we know if they're true or not. And what might it mean to us if all of a sudden it's not true? What does that open to us? It opens up that curiosity, the curiosity of moving into uncertainty of what I believe right in this moment, if I could set that aside and try to look at it from a different point of view and see what happens. That can cause some challenges for us, but that is the uncertainty.
How does a person answer why something happens? For example, Aunt Minnie is in a hospital. Why? Because she went out and she slipped on the ice and broke her hip. That satisfies people. It satisfies, but it wouldn't satisfy someone who came from another planet, knew nothing about things. You first should understand why, when you break your hip, do you go to the hospital? How do you get to the hospital when the hip was broken? Well, because her husband, seeing that she had the hip was broken, called the hospital up and sent somebody to get her. All that is understood by people. Now, when you explain a why, you have to be in some framework that you allow something to be true. Otherwise, you're perpetually asking why. Why did the husband call up the hospital? Because husband is interested in his wife's welfare. Not always. Some husbands aren't interested in their wife's welfare when they're drunk and they're angry. And so you begin to get a very interesting understanding of the world and all its complications. In order to if you try to follow anything up, you go deeper and deeper in various directions. For example, you could go, why did she slip on the ice? Well, ice is slippery. Everybody knows that, no problem. But you ask, why is ice slippery? That's kind of curious. Ice is extremely slippery. It's very interesting. You say, how does it work? So you could either say, I'm satisfied that you've answered me, ice is slippery, that explains it. Or you could go on and say, why is ice slippery?
Yeah, so why is ice slippery? Some of us who are parents or have been around small children, at least, or maybe even when, if you recall, when you were a small child, might remember that 5-year-old that would start asking questions and would keep going on and on and on about why is the sky blue, why do birds fly, etc. And oftentimes as parents, it's not unusual for parents to get to a point where they say, well, just because. That's the way it is. And we'll end the conversation, but we'll also start experiencing some of our own sense of frustration that maybe the reason we stop the conversation is because we don't know the answers. But we can always go deeper. And that's really what Richard Feynman is getting at, is the ability to go deeper and deeper. Almost every question that he might get posed, or, well, not anymore. He passed away in the 1980s. But very, very brilliant mind, but he would almost always take it into the physics and the science of whatever the question was. And we have the ability of doing that, hence the reason why it's nearly impossible to truly answer a why question, but we can certainly go deeper until we reach that level of assumptions that can be okay to stop at. But it's when we do it with awareness, and that's the whole issue here, is if we're aware of what our assumptions are and we can turn toward them and even name them for ourselves and maybe even name them for the people that we're interacting with, we start to open up to a different space. What if I fail? What if I let go of my belief and try something new? What if failure comes on? In a lot of realms, we find that it's our failures that actually allow us to grow the most. The successes that we encounter, we chalk them up, we put a check mark next to them, we get our award or accolade or our recognition, but it's the failures where we learn the most, because that's where we learn how to open up the change.
One of the principles operating in this work is how powerful it is not just to fall over the edge and to encounter failure and to be traumatized, but also the repair process that actually builds character, that enhances our resilience. It is important to actually include failure into the equation of success. We know from the point of view of living systems that break down and learn from the breakdown can reorganize themselves at a much higher and more robust level. And robust is the key here, robustness. Our capacity to actually encounter incredible difficulties, loss, sorrow, failure, and to use that experience as a way to engender not only humility, but to engender wisdom. The capacity to see deeply into who we really are. Because compassion gives you the attentional balance, emotional balance, and insight that allows you to transform even the experiences that have caused us distress, have caused us the most suffering, into qualities of strength.
Uncertainty invites us then to be present with any given moment with some mindfulness and awareness. And it's our thinking patterns that start to take us back into the past or into the future where the uncertainty starts to unfold for us. The future certainly is nothing but uncertainty coming our way, and our assumptions allow us to step through it, sometimes seamlessly, but oftentimes not. With this uncertainty, the loss, the sorrow, the grieving, the failures that start showing up, open us up then to start with the why question. Why did this thing happen, or why am I experiencing this? But then it also allows us to be with ourselves. And our mindfulness practices open the window for us to turn inward, to open to those experiences, to be with them in a different way so that we can learn from them and continue to move forward. And when we have gone over the edge, we can bring ourselves back up to the high edge and continue on in life. So with that, I wish you well.